Paranormal Activity, the found footage cultural phenomenon of the early 2000s. With only a small budget and two main actors, the movie made millions and spawned many sequels, and I'm gonna watch them all. I've always been a fan of these movies for a while now, always being a fan of found footage movies in general. I watched all the movies a long time ago, but it's been a while and I've mostly forgotten about what happens in these movies. And since then, I've grown a more critical lens and my opinions may change. So, not only am I going to rewatch these movies, but I'm also going to give my genuine thoughts and throw the movies on a tier list. I've never done this before, so I might not be the greatest at it, and you may even think my opinions suck, but I love talking about movies, and it's about time I make a YouTube video about one of my favorite film series. Alright, let's finally get on with the video, and our first movie, Paranormal Activity, released in 2007. Side note, in my research, I see that the movie was released in 2007, but then I also see that it says it's been released in 2009. I can't find the correct date, so I just went with 2007. There might be discrepancies with when the movie was officially released in like a film festival versus when it actually came out to wider theaters, but whatever. I should also mention too, it probably goes without saying, but spoilers for every single Paranormal Activity movie. Alright, so something I have forgotten about this movie in time is that this movie is kind of boring at times. It takes a second to really get off the ground, but once it starts, it gets going. And to be fair, during this time where they're talking before the scares really start, it fleshes out their characters really well. The acting is alright, and considering the budget, it's understandable. Though I think Katie is a great actor, she looks genuinely frightened multiple times throughout this movie, especially the scene during the day where she can feel the demon behind her. If I were to make a bingo for these movies, it'd have a square that'd be, guy asks his partner to have sex on camera. He even tries to leave it on without her permission, like come on man. Mika is a very goofy character to me. He sometimes is very mean and does everything you probably shouldn't do in a real haunting situation. The psychic literally says no Ouija boards, and what does Mika do?
Something to say? Now's your chance.
Though it makes sense, all of these movies have to have the idiot that doesn't take anything that seriously, while things really do get worse. It does make me wonder if things wouldn't have gotten as bad as they did with the demon if Micah wasn't there to antagonize it when it is so blatantly pissed off. It was almost funny to me at times how something completely unexplainable happens and then you have Mika calling into the darkness as if he wants to fight the demon.
Your demon's worthless. You're worthless!
The scares in this movie are very good and that makes sense. That's the main selling point of this entire movie. Since this movie has no score, you just sit in silence waiting way too long to eventually hear a loud ass bang or a horrible screeching in the middle of the night. Especially the end where possessed Katie full on throws Micah at the camera after waiting far too long in the dark silence. Another small criticism I have is the psychic guy at the end of the movie just walking in and immediately pussying out as he feels how angry the demon is. He barely gets through the front door and just dips. I would have liked it better if he tried to help for a second and then the demon does something that scares him and he leaves, like, I don't know, throwing something at him. So those are my thoughts for the movie. Where do I put this movie on our list? For now, I think I'm gonna go with a B. High B, low A. The next movie, if I remember correctly, is where everything gets kicked up a notch since it had a much higher budget from the success of the last movie. Let's finally move on to Paranormal Activity 2, released in 2010. Movie 2 watched, and I've always been of the opinion that the second movie is better than the first, and I still stand by that. My small critique of the last movie was that it was kind of boring, but this movie just gets straight into it. Right off the bat, there's more cast and actors, a seemingly higher budget, and camera feeds all over the house so we aren't just fixed to the bedroom like the last movie. There's a scene towards the end after the dad seems to unpossess Christy where he burns a picture of Katie that later shows up in the first movie in the basement. I don't know why he does this, but I'm guessing this scene was just there to better tie this movie up with the first movie. The thing I don't like the most about these movies is all the info for the lore of the demons and shit being just info dumped to you from them finding some random website on the internet. It would have been cooler if via context clues we can see the family is obviously very rich and with further storytelling you could put together that they are potentially rich because of a deal with the demon? But hell, I ain't a movie director, so what do I know? The funniest bit about this movie for me is the dad is so blatantly a ghost denier throughout this movie. He kind of is like Micah, where he doesn't take things seriously at first. It's only until Ali shows him the footage of his wife being dragged down the stairs by nothing that he starts to take things seriously. Which is a nice change of pace to Micah just right up until the end antagonizing the demon. But overall, I'm gonna have to give this movie a 0 out of 10 because they hurt the dog. But in all seriousness, like I said, this is probably my favorite Paranormal Activity movie so far. It's got more going on and more scares and a higher budget. I'm gonna drop this one in the A tier. Okay, quick recap of the last two movies here. To follow the timeline the movies have set up here, the events of the second movie come first. The demon slowly tries to get Hunter and possesses Christy, the mom, to get him. I'm going to assume that biting you is kind of what marks you for possession. Katie was bit in the first movie as well and eventually was possessed. From Ali looking on the web, we can infer their family are rich because of a deal someone in their family past made, and that's why the demon is after Hunter, the firstborn boy since the deal, or male. With the help of the maid the dad fired, he wards off the demon in the basement, and things seemingly go back to normal. Then the events of the first movie happen, seemingly because the demon decided to possess Katie to get to Hunter at her sister's house after the demon was warded off. She murks the dad, flings her sister into the camera like Micah in the first movie, takes Hunter, and the movie ends. So far, this is all we have. Are you still with me? Cool. Let's watch Paranormal Activity 3, released in 2011. Mom, can we watch Hereditary? No, we have Hereditary at home. Hereditary at home. Movie 3 for me is about as good as 2. Lots of crazy scares and more world building towards whatever happened in the family's past that started all these demon hauntings. If you didn't already know, this movie is once again a prequel, pre-prequel if you will, and takes place in the late 80s with the dad Dennis taping everything onto VHS tapes. The movie briefly has a scene that shows the mom taking the burned picture of Katie that shows up in the previous movies. This movie goes more into Katie and Christy's past with all their hauntings when they were just kids. Weirdly, Christy talks to the demon frequently in this movie and calls him Toby. The movie also explains via exposition dump from a book and not the internet that kids are more susceptible to spiritual contact. But mark your bingo cards, another scene where the husband asks to have sex on camera. This time it almost happens, but thankfully the demon or earthquake saves us from this awkward ass scene. This movie is pretty good and a highlight of the franchise like the second movie. I think it's better than the second one. I like that this movie has more to do with the weird cult stuff towards the end. The scenes towards the end of the movie where he just sees all the women dressed in black in the rooms is pretty creepy.
What the fuck?
The scene too where Katie gets Dennis's friend Randy to play Bloody Mary with her and the fallout of them doing that is also a really great scene. I think I'll put this film in front of the second movie on A. Alright, to add to our timeline here, we have the events of the third movie that seemingly are the origins of the demon, aka Toby. There isn't any proof that he's the same demon as the one in the first two films, but I'm gonna assume this is the case. Dennis finds that weird triangle drawing in the small closet, which we can infer is a portal of some kind, probably to hell. Toby haunts the family eventually attempts to escape the hauntings to the kid's grandma's house, but it turns out the grandma is a creepy cult lady doing all kinds of cult shit the first night they stay. You can kinda infer this since earlier in the movie she was talking to the mom asking her to have another kid, specifically a boy, and as we know, the demon wants a boy to finish the deal. We can most likely say the grandma made the deal in the first place. We still don't really know why the grandma killed the family for the kids. This might be explained in the next movie, so we'll just have to wait. She says let's get ready before the footage cuts and the movie ends. For now, this is all we got. Finally, let's move on to the fourth movie, Paranormal Activity 4, released in 2012.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
So, this movie kinda sucks. To start, while watching this movie, it felt very samey immediately to the second movie, and the scares just weren't there for me. It felt very lazy. Maybe I've just come to expect how this movie does scares and it's very predictable for me at this point, but when a lot of the scares came, they just weren't very scary at all. And the majority of these scares are just surprising, like Katie suddenly showing up in the house across the street. On top of that, nothing is added to the lore of this movie, I feel. Usually by the end you get some pieces to why all this is happening, but in this movie nothing really happens. The movie ends with Alex trying to get Wyatt back from the house across the street, and apparently Wyatt is supposed to be Hunter, gets jump scared by a damn army of possessed cult members, and then turns around and possessed Katie kills Alex. So it's basically just a repeat of the second movie, and she takes Hunter and the movie ends. How the hell Wyatt and Hunter ended up adopted by the family when Katie took him at the end of the second movie is never explained and doesn't make any sense. When watching, I thought Robbie, the kid who's just poorly shoehorned into the plot of this movie, was supposed to be Hunter, which I think the movie tries to make you think, but then suddenly Wyatt just starts saying he's Hunter, and then eventually Katie takes him back. So what was the point of Robbie? It would have been better if Robbie was actually Hunter and he was trying to lure Wyatt to the house for whatever cult shit those cult people are up to. I was so convinced this was the case that even in my notes for the movie I wrote that Robbie was Hunter, because it was just so obvious. Okay, editor Brendini note here, I have gotten a few things wrong about this movie. I realized while skimming through this movie again that the scene where the ghost kid is behind Wyatt in the green lights is maybe Hunter? And that scene where he's dunked in the bath is when he goes from Wyatt to Hunter? I guess that makes a little more sense, because this whole time I thought Hunter just somehow got adopted by this family, and the hauntings happened to take him back and just became a repeat of the second movie. I still don't really understand why this was needed though. Why is Hunter a ghost? Why did we need to possess Wyatt and make him Hunter? Why does Robbie exist in the movie? Robbie as a character basically exists as an excuse to get the plot going and trick you into thinking that's Hunter in a really dumb way. To me, it just felt like Wyatt becoming Hunter was a bad writing excuse to make Paranormal Activity 4 a lot like Paranormal Activity 2. Anyway, this has been a long editor note, but I still want to make sure I'm getting what the movie's telling me correct, even if it's still not really that good. Then, the parents. These parents act so nonchalant about everything in this movie and it drives me crazy. In the past, I felt like the parents weren't complete idiots other than the dad in the Paranormal Activity 2 movie denying stuff, but at least he eventually started taking things seriously in the end. Same with the mom in Paranormal Activity 3. In this movie, the parents probably could not have existed in this movie and nothing would have changed. The scene I lost my mind at is when the dad gets scared by the knife falling back down from the ceiling and the mom just straight up ignored him and asked him to go back to bed. Absolutely crazy bad acting or writing. But in retrospect, I realized when the mom died, she felt a lot like Gibby, so at least that was kind of funny. Also, Toby didn't hurt the cat, so 10 out of 10 movie. But in all seriousness, I'm putting this movie in F. Easily the worst one so far. And from what I've seen, this seems to be where the series really starts to dip, and I don't really remember the next movie being the greatest. But without further ado, let's get to Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, aka the fifth movie, released in 2014. So, this movie isn't a whole lot better than the fourth movie, but this movie still is a lot better, so I'll get into it. For one, this movie ditches the trend of having everything mostly happen in the house, and a lot of the paranormal stuff happens in the surrounding area. The main plot is Jesse getting possessed or becoming a marked one, and eventually the cult people come and steal him. It has callbacks to previous movies, like the movie ending in the grandma's house from the third movie, and Hector teleporting to Katie's house in the first movie. Everything happening in the grandma house makes sense and is a nice callback. Teleporting to Katie's house kind of felt like a cheap callback to me because everything happens pretty much the same and it doesn't really change anything about the series except, hey look, Katie's house. The characters are alright and the parents are pretty much non-existent other than their grandma who tries to unpossess Jesse. Shout out to Mexican grandmas, they have to be the biggest enemy to this weird cult of demons in this entire series. Also, the VFX in this movie is much crazier. Other than the goofy scene of Jesse flying over his friend in the skateboard, the scene of him popping back into reality inside their house is also kinda good. But in the end, this movie suffers a lot like 4 in how it doesn't add much to the lore of the series. At this point, we know the cult takes firstborn males, but in this case, it seems Jesse was marked before he was born to become possessed as he got older, and then it gets worse and the cult takes them. But that's very similar to how someone like Hunter is, so I guess I just don't get the point of making a whole movie over a slight, separate variation of possessed demon people. Also, I'm confused on if marked ones also counts with Katie and Christy. They were bit too and became possessed, but the movie seems to say it activates when you turn 18, but when Katie and Christy are possessed, they are well past 18, so I guess the movie's saying you can be marked before birth or just be possessed anytime the same way by a demon. Unless I missed something, this is the best I can get. My favorite thing about this series is the weird cult stuff in the lore, but as of the last two movies, the lore has gotten more confusing for me to put together, and does very little to explain what the cult does and what their purpose is, other than just evil, bah. Overall, I think I'm gonna drop this movie in D tier. Does some things right, also does some things I don't like, but it is nowhere near as bad as 4. Alright, let's jump into the second to last, Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, released in 2015. Alright, so this movie is weird. It does a lot I like and is much better than the previous two I've watched so far, but it also has a lot of small things with it that is kind of weird and I can't really ignore. Let's get into it. For starters, this movie is a lot like the third movie and even has heavy ties to the third movie. The kid Lee this family has is special and linked with Hunter, as they have the same birthday. The Coven knew this, so Katie specifically sold this house to them for super cheap, which turns out to have been built on top of the house from the third movie, and because Hunter and Lee were born on the same day, they're used to give our good old demon Toby a body, and that's basically the plot of this movie with the same buildup of scares. Now, the thing I don't really like is, for some reason the Coven just left the tapes of footage that make up most of the third movie in this new house, which the dad found and watched to figure stuff out. There's also other tapes that show what the cult did with Katie and Christy in the 90s. There's even footage of lost Hunter being with the cult before he was even born. Then the dad, Dennis, also finds the main gimmick of the movie, a special camera that can see the demon. It's neat to see all this, but doesn't make any sense. Why would they leave all this stuff in the house? These tapes never seem to stay in one place ever in this series, and it's really funny to me. I was reading some reviews and people really hated the special effects in this movie with Toby being like this weird black sludge that animates in real time, but I really liked it personally. I thought it was better than the previous movie's weird black shadow that just moved across you. The movie does this weird thing at the end where the family calls a priest for help and they make it seem like they stopped Toby, but then he just seems to have possessed the wife, and then she throws up straight acid onto the dad's brother like an alien film, which I just thought was dumb. Like, what even happened here then? Did it work or not? Was Toby just playing games with them and wanted to make it seem like for a second they were actually doing something? And then in the end, the movie ends with the mom with the camera traveling through a portal to the 90s where Katie and Christy are in their old house, do the ritual for Toby to get a body, kills the mom, and the movie ends. I think for me personally, after watching 6 of these movies now, the formula has gotten stale. The first 3 were cool because it explained a lot of the lore and had nice callbacks, but by the 4th it was basically the exact same predictable scares, and then the end would just show more of what we already know. It didn't feel necessary to me to have an entire movie just to tell me that Lee is going to eventually get used in the demon ritual, which is almost the exact same formula of all the other movies. The plot of what's happening in this movie was pretty much told to you right at the beginning. I would love if at least one of these movies followed the Coven more closely and what they actually do. The footage seems to be there with Katie and Christy. I want to see more of it. Though, to give credit where it's due, this movie does tie into the lore much better than the previous ones. You could skip 4 and 5 and nothing would be lost. Everything in this movie would still make sense, but it just doesn't do enough different for it to be that much better. I think I'm gonna drop this movie in C tier. It's better, but there's just small things in this movie that don't make any sense and I just can't ignore. By this point, I won't lie, I'm pretty bored. I don't remember this series falling off so hard, but there's only one more movie, so I might as well get it over with. This movie had the longest release gap, being released in 2021 when this movie, The Ghost Dimension, came out in 2015. Without further ado, let's get to the last film, Paranormal Activity, Next of Kin, released in 2021. Okay, so like I said before I watched this movie, I was getting very bored of these movies and I was worried this 7th movie was going to be a slog, and it wasn't. It was very different from the Paranormal Activity formula, but there are still a bunch of problems I have with this movie. The biggest glaring issue I had is that this movie constantly seems to not want to be a found footage movie at all. It constantly does things that wouldn't make sense for such film, like cuts to angles where there's no camera, random glitches, random SFX that plays that wouldn't make sense for a camera to pick up.
Who's your target?
There's even this cool slow-mo shot when my best boy Dale gets some sick jaw realignment surgery, but once again, it's found footage. Why is there slow-mo editing in a found footage movie? Another thing is the plot of this movie has no real connection to the plot of the original movies. This seems to be another case of an IP being slapped on a random movie script to get people to watch it. I thought the demon they were keeping in the church was going to be Toby in his human form, but no, I guess it's Marigold's mom possessed to be the demon, which I don't even know how Marigold knew that that was her mom. Maybe I missed something, but this seemed to have just come up all of a sudden. It really sucks too, because while talking about the last movie, I mentioned how I wanted more stuff with the cult, and this seemed to have been the movie made in heaven for me, but instead it just doesn't feel like a Paranormal Activity movie at all, and not even a found footage movie. I'm kind of upset they blundered this so hard. This movie actually could have been pretty decent on its own if it didn't have the Paranormal Activity IP slapped on it. And it would have been even better if the jump scares didn't have this loud SFX to tell you, hey, you're supposed to be scared here. Next of kin, you suck. I ain't giving you a rating. You killed Dale and blundered a movie that could have been great. I'm putting you in the void. Man, it's finally finished. A week of Paranormal Activity movies for me. Do you think they'll make an 8th movie? I honestly hope not. At this point, this series is cursed. They hit lightning in the bottle with the original trilogy, and then just kept making bad decisions with the subsequent films. And it kinda makes sense. How do you add more to a series that already explained itself with the first 3 movies? As for you guys, if you watched the whole video, it's the first time in a while I've done an edited review style video that isn't just me playing games, so I hope you enjoyed. And if you agree or think my opinions suck, feel free to leave a comment, I'll for sure read it. That's it for now. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in whatever other video I make.